Well, folks, thanks for coming out for this event today at the Robert Jackson Center. And we have a program which I think all of you probably have a copy of. And we're going to start by asking the Iowa Spring Post to post the colors. Please stand. Remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Rolland Swanson, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And to remain standing, Howard Lindstrom, the chaplain of the Iowa Spring Post American Legion, will lead us in invocation.
Shall we bow our heads? Most gracious and loving God, judge of all the nations, we remember before you with grateful hearts the men and women who in the day of decision ventured much for the liberties we enjoy. Grant that we may not rest until all the people of this land share the benefits of our freedom and accept its many obligations. You have blessed us in so many ways, and we thank you. It's for the opportunity to unite in this moment of prayer, this special privilege we have in America. May our fellowship be blessed as we strive to keep America one nation under God. Amen.
You may be seated. Before I start saying anything else, I wanted to give a few thank yous for today's event. The Robert Jackson Center, which you're sitting in, used to be a Masonic consistory. And just this past year, before Carl Kappa died, he endowed a new organization in town here called the Robert Jackson Center. Betty Lene, the foundations have supported it, and Greg Peterson is the chairman of the Robert Jackson Center board, and I believe Greg is coming in a little bit later. Randy Sweeney sort of standing in for him. He's the executive director of our Community Region Foundation here. But Greg is going to be here later on, and I want to just clue you veterans into something. We're taping all this today, and I'm going to give you a free book, but I'm not going to give you a free tape, okay? So if you want a tape, it's not going to be a lot probably. I don't even know what it's going to be yet, but we thought we would add to it any comments you might have. And over here, as you go way down this hallway, at the end, they call it the gold room or the yellow room. We're going to have these cameras over there after this little event is over with. And we hope that while people are downstairs having lemonade or coffee and some cookies, that you'll work your way over to that room. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm just saying it'd be terrific to have you say a few things. Now, what kind of things am I hoping you'll say? If there's any mistakes in the book, I've already told somebody that he made captain and he wasn't a lieutenant today. So you can correct anything you want to. There's reflections, though, on the war. There's a chapter in this book where at the end called Reflections on the War. If you have any things you want to say about that time period, fine. And I think it'd be terrific if you have any advice to the next generation, because I think right now we're living in a very timely period for what you went through in the mid-20th century. And so we hope that at least some of you, and I hope all of you, but we'll seek out Ed Tomasini. He's here from the Civic Center. We thank them for their cooperation. And he will be handling the cameras. In terms of thank yous, Marshall Carlson at the consistory was here, getting us set up, making sure all the light switches were. Ken Furlow, commander of the of the Legion. Our little spring post was in the color guard and has been a great help on getting all this organized. Howard and Phyllis Lindstrom are here with a bunch of volunteers from the Legion. We want to thank them. Kristen Stein is here from the Fenton History Center, which I'll get to in just a minute. They are obviously interested in This Is History, and they're going to be selling this book. And they did sell the last edition of the book. So we hope that you'll say hi to Kristen, and I'll tell you what the terms of the book purchase are in a minute. But she's here to take any book sales today. I mentioned the Arts Council and Ed Tomasini and their cooperation today. Some friends of mine, Gail Betts and his brothers Bob and Dick Betts, their dad Art, some of you may have known from down in Kennedy, a Pacific War veteran in the Army, recently died, but they were down here this morning to move chairs around and help, and we're happy to have them here. And then my wife, who was a little reluctant, I must say, to do this book one more time, but we did it, and Jane, I thank you for your support, and I want to thank someone who is not here from our family. This new cover of this book, which I think is, you know, when I decided to do the book again, the people in the book business said, you've got to have something new and different about the book, like a new cover. So we have a new cover. And Bud Fisher and his fighter pilot buddies are on the front of it this time. But Bart did this whole thing. I couldn't have done it without him. And if you see the word Sandy Bottom Press, it happens to be that I live on Chautauqua Lake at Sandy Bottom. And that's why it's called Sandy Bottom Press. But my son Bart is Sandy Bottom Press, as far as I'm concerned. So we want to thank Bart. So anyway, after we're done here today, veterans will be happy to sign books. If those of you here want to buy extra books, I have signed just the title page of the books that are there now, but I can put somebody's name on it or something if you'd like. And we're going to have, the Legion's going to have a fellowship hall reception, lemonade, cookies, coffee, that kind of thing. We just hope you'll hang around, especially if you're a spouse or with one of these veterans and you want to get them on that taping we're going to do. You may have to stay for a couple minutes, okay? So we want to thank the Legion for all of that. Why a third edition, I guess, I want to just address that. We ran out of copies, number one. We sold out. In the prior two editions, we sold 2,500 copies. I shouldn't say we sold them. We probably gave away 300 or 400, let's face it. But we sold a lot of copies. Warren Berry up at Berry's Bookstore says, you know, people don't sell that kind of copies of a book. That's a self-published book. And we sent copies all over this country. I mean, I don't know where people found out about the book, to be honest with you. But the people I deal with in Washington, I'm on the World War II Memorial Committee down there. They've read the book and they say it's better than Ambrose's book or Brokaw's book. You know, and I don't, you know, it's not because maybe it's better written, but I think it's more about the way the real world was. I mean, the average hometown, the average guy and woman, and they went off to war. And I think we try to get a representation all across Pacific, Europe, China, Burma, India, and all kinds of pilots, infantrymen, Marines, and I think it gives people a good cross-section of what happened in America during the time. So thank you for doing this one more time. I guess I'm stubborn. Let me just explain to you a little bit about the book, how you finance a book like this. The first thing you got to do is write a big check up front to get the print shop to print it, okay? The price on this book is more or less set so that all the bookstores, when you sell a book, get 40% of the list price. And that's the way the book business works. Today, the 40% of this, by the way, $28.83 would be the list price. Today it's on sale for $28. How do you like that? This is, we don't want to fool with change, okay? And but 20% of any books purchased today will go to this Robert Jackson Center and 20% to the Fenton History Center. I just wanted you to know how the business of the book business works. But the other thing we did in this edition, I thought we needed more focus on the Battle of the Bulge, and we have 6 veterans who came forward, and I tried to get them in different places in the Bulge, on the attack, on the shoulders, the counterattack in Bastogne. I think in 100 years from now, probably that battle will go down in history with Gettysburg, and I thought it should be more developed in the book. Another thing, we got an award. Joanne Schweik is here, and by the way, I mentioned her name, Joanne. I'd like to give my editor a little hand, Joanne Schweik. You get another book, Joanne. Joanne was willing to go one more time down the trail with me, and does a terrific job as an editor, and I want to thank Joanne. But the Writer's Digest Award was her idea. Sent it in, and we got an award. There were 362 books presented. There were 6 awards, and we got one. And so it's excuse me. And then in my course of working on the World War II Memorial, I met Stephen Ambrose, the author of many World War II books that I have a great deal of respect for in Washington. And I sent him the book, and he wrote me a great letter back and said, hey, if you want to put something in your book next time, here it is. And so it's on the back, and it's also inside. But Stephen Ambrose. So I thought that would help us maybe sell enough books here to break even. But anyway, those are the reasons why we went ahead and did the 3rd edition. We're going to, I just want to give you a flavor of the Battle of the Bulge chapter. And let me read, one of the things that I did in the book that Brokar doesn't do in his book is try to give the reader some background of why these veterans were in these places. Because even today, kids don't know where Guadalcanal is. They have no idea where Iwo Jima is. They don't know where Normandy is, some of them probably, And so I tried to lay the groundwork as to why we should be there. And let me just read you the background on the Battle of the Bulge a little bit and bore you. Then I'm going to have Tom come up with what happened to him holding the shoulder in the 1st Infantry Division. Tom's from Fredonia and is in the chamber over there, and I'm sure a lot of you know Tom from North County. On December 16, 1944, the German army attacked with incredible force along an 80-mile front in eastern Belgium, near the border with Germany. It was an attack personally planned and supervised by Adolf Hitler in an attempt to save his regime. If he could slice between the American and British forces and reach the port of Antwerp, perhaps he could divide the Allies and seek a peace settlement to end World War II. The battle would end with over 80,000 casualties for the Allied side, killed, wounded, and captured, and another 100,000 similar casualties on the German side. What has become known as the Battle of the Bulge for many Americans has reached a level of significance close to that of the Civil War battle at Gettysburg. The Battle of the Bulge, unlike Gettysburg, which was a 2 or 3 day battle, lasted over 1 month and involved a German penetration or bulge of some 50 miles into American lines. However, despite poor intelligence and being ill-prepared for the attack, it also has become known as one of the great triumphs for American citizen soldiers. Stuck in the snows of the Ardennes Mountains in frigid temperatures, with bad weather shutting down air support, American soldiers of World War II fought and gave ground grudgingly, sometimes forced to surrender after food and ammunition ran out, sometimes surrounded for a short time at St. Vith and for a week at Bastogne. They remained defiant and unwilling to surrender and fought on against seemingly insurmountable odds. And it was snowing all the time. When I interviewed these guys this winter, it was a bad winter here. We are all that were here, remember it. And they'd look out the window and say, yeah, that's what it was like in the bulge. So it was an appropriate winter to interview them, I thought. Finally, on Christmas Day, in an epic tank battle, the American 2nd Armored Division stopped the German 2nd Panzer Division in a confrontation on the farm fields surrounding Celles, Belgium. The 75th Infantry Division and other American forces joined in the counterattack. The skies also began to clear and American planes began to hammer the German forces engaged in the battle. The Germans had to retreat or be cut off, but what really beat the enemy was the spirit of the American soldier, the willingness to bend and not break to defeat Hitler and end the war so that he could get home to friends and family. A few weeks after the battle ended, Winston Churchill summed it up in a speech before the House of Commons when he called it America's greatest victory of the war. We are fortunate today to be able to see it through the eyes of six. 5 of the 6 are here today, and they were willing to tell us about it. So their stories are in this new edition, and I'm going to ask Tom Parisi. Tom was on the northern shoulder of the Bulge in the 1st Infantry Division. They actually saw a little more action later on as the fighting moved into Germany. But I thought it was an interesting story about how he got introduced to combat and what happened to him in the Bulge. So Tom, you go to the down here, okay? And you can ad-lib if you want.
Thank you, Rolland. We want to welcome all of you, fellow veterans. I'm really happy to be here, and at my age, I'm happy to be anywhere. I'm happy for my wife, Marilyn, who accompanied me and through the years has made me go straight. It's been a long time since an 18-year-old from Silver Creek, New York, was drafted into the Army. I can remember the train out of Dunkirk, the bus from Fredonia, and Buffalo Station was there with that big buffalo in the main entrance, and the train on our way to New York City, Camp Upton, and then a train to nowhere. No one knew where we were going. The rumors were flying around, and it was Fort McClellan, Alabama. But aside from that, about 3,000 of us are on the troop train, and one person came down with a case of the mumps, and that was me. I was sick all the way to Alabama. They had an ambulance waiting when the train stopped, rushed me to the hospital, and I was there about 3 or 4 weeks and recuperated, went into basic training. At 18 years old, you can almost do anything. I will never forget my introduction to combat. It was the start of the winter of 1944, and we had just been thrown in as replacements for the 1st Infantry Division. We were MOS 745, riflemen replacements. You couldn't get any lower than that. It was right before the Battle of the Bulge, and the unit was fighting in the Hurtgen Force as part of the Ardennes. They sent us into the lines, and the first casualties I saw were bodies of 5 stiff, dead American soldiers stacked on top of each other. I didn't know what the hell to think. I think I wanted to go home, but I knew that we were in the war now. I hadn't really been prepared for a sight like that. The Germans inflicted a lot of casualties, thereby firing artillery into the tops of the trees. The splinters from the trees and the shrapnel killed a lot of our boys. I was only 19, you know, and we just didn't think it would happen to us. But when you see them laid out like that, you know that it could. After the initial fighting in the Hurtgen Force, we were pulled back into Belgium for some rest. It was at this point that the lieutenant came to me and said, "Barisi, we don't have a squad leader for your squad. What training have you had?" Apparently our squad leader had been killed or wounded. I told him I didn't have much training, just back home at Fort McClellan and Camp Van Dorn. Just like that, he offered me 3 stripes to me, and I said, "Okay, let's try it." And I became a sergeant overnight, which is absolutely crazy. What did I know about leading men at my age? They were just as frightened as I was. It was December by now, and we were supposed to be relaxing off the line. "Get yourselves a Christmas tree, guys," they said. So we did. We had a family who let us use their house, and we started to look forward to Christmas. We even had the Red Cross there giving us donuts and coffee. Then on December 19th, it all changed. We got the order, drop it guys. The Germans had penetrated. The Battle of the Bulge had started on the 16th, but we didn't know anything about it until the 19th. We headed northeast toward the northern shoulder of the German breakout to take over the positions of the 99th Infantry Division. As we walked uphill toward where they had been, we saw evidence of what the hell had happened. I had never seen body parts before, but I did that day. We were in snow up to our buns, and it took our positions in the old foxholes dug by the 99. It was about that time when we heard stories about the Malmedy massacre. The Germans shot over 100 of our guys there, right in the snow after they had disarmed them. One of the most barbarous acts committed during the Battle of the Bulge was when the Nazi SS troopers massacred 101 captured American troops near the town of Malmedy, Belgium. An aside, we visited that monument a year or so ago at Malmedy, my wife and I. That certainly scared us. Our outfit also told us to be aware of the fact that Germans had dropped paratroopers with excellent English language skills in GI clothing, and that we should challenge soldiers with questions that only Americans would know, like, who is Babe Ruth? That scared us even more. We were in holes and it was freezing up there. The most fearful thing that happened to me when I was when the lieutenant came up to me and said, "Barisi, pick out a half a dozen guys and go clear out that grove of evergreens," which was about a half a mile away. I said, "Are you kidding?" I asked. He said, "No." "Get going." Well, we went. Thank goodness nothing happened, but I want to tell you, that was pressure for a 19-year-old kid. Actually, the Germans never pressured us there. We were there about 3 weeks and the skies cleared and our bombers came. After that, it was just a matter of time. And of course, Patton started coming in from the south and it was over. But I will always remember that Christmas Eve. Every Christmas Eve, I always go back in my mind to where we were. There in the cold, all of us in holes, thinking about a white Christmas, but wishing we were having it at home. Thank you very much.
Well, that doesn't cause you to buy a couple of books, something's wrong. Thank you, Tom. Great story. I want to just have a few reflections, I guess, on today's generation. I was going to do this after getting the books out, but maybe I can get it through it better if I do it now. We drove across the country, been in San Francisco. 2 weeks ago today, we were at the signing of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Japanese peace treaty. Jane and I were. And we were with our daughter Betsy. And it was a wonderful event. Those of you who fought in the Pacific, George Elder, you remember the hatred and the anger towards the Japanese. You remember them driving their planes into our ships. They wouldn't surrender. They believed the emperor was God. Does this sound familiar from a couple days ago? And they did whatever they were told to do. And they were told to take down as many American troops as they possibly could and not to surrender, and that's what they did. And there's men in this room that had to go deliver the firepower of America against them. And it wasn't fun. And I think part of the reason a lot of GIs from the time had anger is American soldiers, sailors, and airmen are not born to be killers. And they had to do it and finish the war. And yet one of the great legacies of World War II is that our great enemies became our great allies. And if you think about how it happened, Some of it goes, of course, back to the Casablanca Conference in 1942, which you guys didn't even know was going on. Churchill and Roosevelt sit down in a couple of chairs over in Morocco, and they decide that the war is going to end only one way, with unconditional surrender. So part of the fault was ours. We weren't going to let it end any other way. But Roosevelt and Churchill, I think, had been through World War I when there was a partial peace, and it didn't solve anything. It all broke out. And with the views of our enemies that they were super races, that they were going to dominate the world by force. In Japan, women had no right to vote. Women didn't go to school. They didn't have the right to go to school. The Japanese race considered themselves to be superior to everybody else in Asia. They went down through China with the arms. We all know about the German history with death camps and Hitler and all the rest of it. So Churchill and Roosevelt said, we're not going to end this war without unconditional surrender. And so that's why you guys had to go through what you went through, because it wasn't going to end any other way. And with the great legacy, I think, is the last 50 years, we took those two enemies, and they've been our greatest democratic allies in the world, which is a great, when you think about it, a great legacy. I came home from that, was in California when the bombing happened, and I said to myself, I wonder what these guys in this book and other World War II vets want to say to the generation today that just had their wake-up call. And I want to read one thing in the book, and I want to read a couple things that I believe will be engraved in the World War II memorial. The President has appointed a new commission. I'm no longer a commissioner of the American Battle Monument Commission. But I tell people, don't worry about it. My replacement's Tom Ridge. He's well qualified. So, who knows if he'll be on the American Battle Monument Commission, because he just got a new call on television this week. But, and he's well qualified. He's a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Heart guy from Vietnam, and he's been down the trail in my war. But anyway, one of the things that I think is going to be in the World War II memorial, not this whole thing I'm going to read to, but some of it's going to be there. And it wouldn't have been there if I hadn't have interviewed one individual in this room, because we've gotten thousands of pages of quotes about World War II from Army at Carlisle, from the Navy, the Air Force, from everybody, all the historians, and they've never come up with this. But Tony Costanzo, when he was on a ship from England heading down to North Africa, and they told him to shave their heads because head wounds weren't good, and they were all kids, and they were scared, and Roosevelt didn't know if they could win. They were going up against the Germans. We'd never gone up against the Germans. This was 1942. These guys didn't even know where they were going. And he ended up, they were in Iran, Algeria. But Tony brought in this, it was in his service jacket. He brought it home from the war. And I have it now. Thank you, Tony. But this is what it says. It was written to members of the United States. This is what do you want to tell these kids today? Listen to what our war aims were. And I think this is probably what they need to hear. And I hope they read the book and find out what you just told them, I think, in the book. But to members, it's in the flyleaf of our book here. To members of the United States Army Expeditionary Force, you are a soldier of the United States Army. You have embarked for distant places where the war is being fought. Upon the outcome depends the freedom of your lives, the freedom of the lives of those you love, your fellow citizens, your people. Never were the enemies of freedom more tyrannical, more arrogant, more brutal. Yours is a God-fearing, proud, courageous people, which throughout its history has put its freedom under God before all other purposes. We who stay at home have our duties to perform, duties owed in many parts to you, the home front. You will be supported by the whole force and power of this nation. The victory you win will be a victory of all the people, common to them all. You bear with you the hope, the confidence, the gratitude, and the prayers of your family, your fellow citizens, and your president, Franklin Roosevelt. Every guy on those ships got that letter. And it came out of this. And I think it'll be engraved in granite for 1,000 years, portions of it. What else would these veterans want to tell this generation? Let me just give you a couple of other quotes that I think will be in the memorial. Americans didn't go to war for territorial conquest. We went to war over ideas, over our way of life, over the defense of freedom. But it was brutal, like we just went through that. At the end of the war, on the 2nd of September 1945, the Japanese surrender, President Truman made this statement, which I think says a lot. I'm speaking to you at a high moment in history. The war has produced total victory. This is a time of great rejoicing and solemn contemplation. We can now turn to the grave task of preserving the peace. War must be abolished from the earth. Civilization cannot survive another total war. If this war we're getting into now ends up in a total war with nuclear weapons, this civilization will not survive another total war. Truman is right. And it's up to the young people, today's generation, people like David out there, we're going to have to make sure that we don't have total war, but they've still got to preserve freedom. It's not an easy task. And he put the word civilization in there. Have you heard a lot of that in recent days? This isn't just us. It's a challenge to civilization. Then there's another quote. It came later on, a couple of years after the war ended, and George Marshall became Secretary of State. And the issue was to rebuild these enemies, to make them democracies. Here's what George Marshall said at Harvard. We find our nation in a world position of vast responsibility. We can act for our own good by acting for the world's good. The United States should assist in the return of normal economic health in the world, without which there can be no political stability and no assured peace. God forbid we ever go back to isolationism in this country. The world won't let us, I don't think, but we should take up the duties that we have as Americans, our worldwide responsibilities, not with arrogance, but with solemn commitment, because there's no other nation today that can pull the world from the edge, and we've got to do it. So I don't know, I may be putting words in these guys' mouths, but that was sort of my take on what I would say at this point. Since I put this thing together, you have to put up with it. Thank you very much. We're going to distribute books to the veterans now, and Ken Furlow, the commander of the Iowa Spring Post American Legion, and Sergeant David Adams, who's on active duty with the Army, and the son of Evelyn Adams, is here today, and I've asked them to give the books, and at the same time they're going to give you a World War II pin, the official pin of the World War II Memorial, which, by the way, you can see what it's going to look like later on if you want to come up. And we should be under construction sometime in November or December. So, as we do this, I want to go through the book, and the chapters go from the beginning of the war to the end. They flow from Europe to the Pacific to try and get. And you don't have to read it in one sitting. This is a good book to read it every night. Read one chapter before you go to bed, type of book. Okay, but it does have a flow to it. The first book goes to Machinist Mate Second Class Joe Pontebianco at Pearl Harbor on December 7th in a chapter the day the war began. And I would like Ken Furlow and David to come out and sort of stand in this area. One of them's going to give the book, one the pin. They'll pin it on you if you've got something to pin it to, and then the cameras can get a little picture of you. Okay, so if you'll do it out here like this, I'd appreciate it. Okay, the next chapter is about how the whole world was consumed in World War II. There's two people in it. And the first went around the world by ship, on a command ship for the U.S. Army, Sergeant Samuel Penfield Price on the Ancon in a chapter around the world. Sam? you. In the same chapter, went around the world by airplane, ferrying airplanes all over Europe and the United States. Then he got transferred to fly the hump from India into China. Lieutenant Tony Mangine, U.S. Army Air Corps. Is Phyllis Skinner here? Is Phyllis here?
Probably she couldn't be here. She had
Okay.
sister pass away.
You want to get this book for her later, Billy, so you can leave it up here. Her husband, Norm Skinner, died a few years ago and flew B-17s in the Arctic, of all places. And there's a chapter in the book called Fighting in the Arctic. Okay. D-Day, the invasion of Normandy. The Big Red One, the 1st Infantry Division on the 2nd Wave, Corporal Tony Costanzo, U.S. Army. We lost a lot of people on D-Day, but we lost a lot more when they tried to break out of the beachhead. And Bob Kerr, Sergeant Bob Kerr, 35th Infantry Division, to break out from Normandy. Thank you. Margaret Marker is in a book called A Nurse's Scrapbook. Margaret died a few years ago. I sent a letter to her nephew, but apparently they couldn't come. He's still in the state of Washington. Ralph Pearson, flew B-24s, died a couple of years ago, and I asked one of his kids, but I don't think, is anybody here from the Pearson family? Mike Mac McIntyre's son called from Fredonia. He couldn't make it today. And Mary Caprino, the widow of Joe Caprino, there's a wonderful story in the book about when the Leopoldville was sunk off the coast of France in 1944, and a lot of casualties occurred, and Joe Caprino jumped into the icy water, and Mike McIntyre was saving guys out of the water. And a few got saved, and who knows, it could have been Mike or Mac McIntyre that saved them. We'll never know, I guess, but they're not here. So we jump now to the Battle of the Bulge. Bob Steer, 106th Infantry Division, in the first part, a subchapter called Attack the Hammer Falls. And he fought for a week, ran out of food and ammunition, and spent the rest of the war in a POW camp. Bob Steer. Another individual, Jim Penhowell, can't be with us, 28th Infantry Division, same chapter, the Hammer Falls. His whole outfit was overrun, and I think 17 out of 120 in his company got back. Anyway, he's sick today. This next individual, I wanted to find somebody in the 101st Airborne who was surrounded in Bastogne, and I called the Legion, I called the VFW, I couldn't seem to find anybody. So Manly Anderson, a Post Journalist or someplace there was, and I want to thank them for their work because they put a little squib in the paper, and I got a phone call from Lloyd Schultz, Private First Class Lloyd Schultz, 101st Airborne Division, U.S. Army, surrounded, we will not surrender. We heard from Sergeant Barisi, Tom Barisi, same, or in the same chapter, but a subchapter, holding the shoulders, containing the German advance, 1st Infantry Division. Sergeant Barisi. Is there anybody else here from the 101st? I don't think so. Thank you. Okay, and the last in that chapter on the Battle of the Bulge, second to the last, sorry, the counterattack, retaking the Bulge, PFC, Ron Putnam, U.S. Army, 2nd Armored Division. Thank you, Ron. The last person in that chapter is like a whole book, this chapter, isn't it? I told you. Private First Class Ron Putnam, U.S. Army. We just did Ron, sorry. Sergeant Phil Pelletier, U.S. Army, Rifleman, 75th Infantry Division. Now, one of the not so noble parts of our history of World War II is we had segregated units then. We didn't have integrated fighting units. And I wanted somebody who fought for the United States in a segregated unit. And let me just read you what I would like Corporal Vivian Taylor to come up, U.S. Army Europe, in a chapter, Young Negro Goes to War. Vivian, would you please come up? And while you're coming, I want to read what I put. I wrote something in the front for all these guys, okay? You go out there where you're supposed to. Just wait a second. Here's what I said to Vivian, and I really believe this. Thank you for your story about what it was like as a black American in World War II. Because of your commitment and sacrifice, you laid the foundation for the post-war civil rights movement, which I think did come out of World War II. One of the great friends I made when I did these initial interviews isn't with us anymore, and but his widow, his wife, is here, Elsie Johansson, for Sergeant Fred Johansson in the Office of Strategic Services, fighting behind the lines. He parachuted into France and Norway. Another good friend of mine that is in my church, I didn't know about what his story was, and when it was all done, his wife said to me, read the the rough draft and said, Raleigh, we didn't know any of this. We're glad you did this. So I'm glad I did it. Tech Sergeant Robert Putney, Infantryman, U.S. Army, 45th Division, the Italian Campaign. Okay, we have a very interesting little chapter about fighting on the other side, and I've got Pete Caprino, he was in the Italian Army. Gino Michiche was in the Italian Navy. But at the end of the war, Gino came over to our side, fought in a battalion at Monte Cassino with the British, and was awarded the highest Medal of Honor in the Italian Army, and he became an ally. Quite an interesting story. And so I'd like to give Gino, and I'm also going to give him Pete's book, and I'll have to get Mary's book later to you, I guess. I don't seem to see it here. Lieutenant Gino Michiche, Italian Republican Navy, fighting on the other side. Now we're out of Europe. Can you believe it? We're going to get out of here by 3 o'clock or close to it, so don't worry. We're heading into the Middle East now. Most people don't realize we had 40,000 troops in the Middle East and Iran in World War II. There were 2 production plants over there making trucks, assembling trucks. The parts came to the United States, and GIs put them together. And 7,500 trucks loaded with ammunition went up into Iran and into southern Russia to help defeat the Germans. Huge effort. Private First Class Alan Finley, U.S. Army, Iran, Americans in the Persian Gulf. I'd like to ask Priscilla and Janet Robbins. Is Janet here? You can represent her then, Priscilla. We had 2 identical twins that went to war in the U.S. Navy, and they're on that. Put them in the Pacific side because most of their time was spent in the Pacific. In a wonderful chapter called "Identical Twins Go to War." Priscilla Robbins is here for her husband Bob, and I'll give you the other book also. So thanks. And Priscilla, oh yeah, make sure you get one for your sister-in-law. Now Priscilla, we had to do a new book cover, which means your husband's not on the cover anymore, but I got some of the old covers for you. Okay, we're into China, Burma, India. Captain, not lieutenant, I was told today. Captain Charlie Price. China, Burma, India. 2 friends meet on the Burma Road. I wanted a fighter pilot. He lived across the street from me on Chestnut Street. Didn't even know the story until we talked. Lieutenant Commander Bud Fisher, fighter pilot, U.S. Navy, held cats in the Pacific. Bud, he's on the front page, of course. You know, one of the great stories of the World War II is the production in this country and the supply effort to supply all these troops over there. When you have 16 million people in uniform, and they're all over the world, it's a big job keeping them supplied. By the way, and the guy I'm going to bring up here next reminded me that this is not a very politically correct cover. They're smoking cigarettes. We had a big discussion of that. My editor, Joanne Schweik, who doesn't smoke, said, hey, we got to put it in there the way it is. So that's, I think it's okay. Anyway, we have a chapter about supply and construction in the Pacific. Just one tidbit of information to give you an example. In 4 years, the U.S. Army Air Corps took delivery of 279,000 airplanes. That's a lot of airplanes. That shows you the kind of production it went for. Shipfitter third class, Rolland Swanson, U.S. Navy Seabees, supply and construction in the Pacific. Bob Olson in the same chapter. Bob, Tech 5th grade, U.S. Army, Fort Battalion. Gentleman I met in politics, County Court Judge, Lieutenant Lee Town Adams, U.S. Navy, submarines out of Midway, fighting beneath the waves.
That's why he became a judge.
Three people that I'm going to announce couldn't make it because of health reasons. Joe Zanetta, 12th Armored Division, liberating the death camps. Will Purley on battling the kamikazes. His ship almost got hit, did have some damage off the coast of the Philippines. Tony Duino, great chapter coming home, but it's not very well right now. And Tony was in a POW camp during the war, for the whole war. And I thought it was a great perspective to put in the book, and it was in our last edition, but they couldn't be here today. Corporal George Elder, U.S. Marine Corps, Iwo Jima, the hell called Iwo Jima. And finally, I think of those who are here. Guy sang in the church choir with, kept wearing this tie pin all the time, this tie clasp. It was a B-29, and I found out he was a waist gunner, a blister gunner, and a B-29. And it was his experiences actually flying in the Pacific and firebombing Japan and the horrific parts of the memories of it that led him into the Christian ministry, and he was a Presbyterian minister and now retired. But Sergeant Carl Lenz, U.S. Army Air Forces, waist gunner B-29. Now, I gave these gentlemen a few extra World War II pins, and I know I see a couple World War II veterans out there. If you're a World War II veteran, they're here today, but not in this book, I'd like you to come up and have one of these World War II pins pinned on you. Jim, come on. You guys come up here. Before we have the benediction, did Greg Peterson make it? Was he here?
He was.
He's around, Bruce is here. So I just want to make sure that he's going to be handling the interviews. And if you had, I'm on the board of Robert Jackson, and we were going to also give you a little flyer about this center. I don't know if that got passed around, did it? Yeah. Okay. Tom, how much, or Ed, how much time do you need to reset up over there? Just 5 minutes? So 5 minutes to get up, set up for our interviews in that room over there, and the rest of you are all invited downstairs to have something to. I want to thank everybody for helping make this happen. I think it was a great event, don't you? And Howard is going to have the benediction, and then if we can do it, we're going to try to sing God Bless America or something.
May the strength of God sustain us. May the power of God preserve us. May the hands of God protect us, and the way of God direct us. May the grace of God comfort us, and may the love of God be with us now and forever. Amen.
God